Build your better breakfast at Subway with the tasty 250 combo, a 16-ounce cup of freshly brewed Seattle's best coffee, and any delicious egg muffin melt. And don't hit the snooze on this deal. Right now, come in before 11 a.m. for a $5 foot-long breakfast sub. Subway, eat fresh. The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
this is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
It might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. Sunny day here in Southern California. We have two guests. My friend Dave Damashek coming up a little bit later to talk Steelers-Pats. Our team's going head-to-head. But first, on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline, the author of How Lucky You Could Be, and my favorite baseball writer, ESPN's own Buster Olney. What's happening? Is it hot stove season? Is it official?
It is definitely hot stove. I'm sure when Brian Cashman got on the plane to go down to Arkansas to meet with Cliff Lee, I think that's when it officially became hot stove.
That's when the stove got turned on?
When the Yankees opened the checkbook, then absolutely yes.
I'm going to throw out my scenario for how this whole winter plays out, and then you give me the odds on me being right. Ready?
Okay.
The Yankees, they go after Cliff Lee, but not really, because they know Texas is going to spend money on him. They know that for Texas to let him go for less than like 140 would be a mistake and kind of an insult to their fans. So that they really want Carl Crawford, I think. The Red Sox also want Carl Crawford, but yet I think you were the one who even wrote this. Carl Crawford might not like the Yankees or the Red Sox. He's got some animosity toward them. He's got his friend Torrey Hunter and the Angels. Anaheim. He can go head-to-head against these guys. They'll pay him a lot of money. He goes there. Cliff Lee goes back to the Rangers. And then the Red Sox and Yankees don't end up getting anybody. What do you think?
I think it's possible. Your scenario, I still think the Yankees will get one of the two guys. Now, I know that the Rangers ownership coming off, a great high, making it to the World Series for the first time, given the fact that the Cowboys are down, they see a real opportunity in that market. And I agree with you. I think they're going to be a lot more aggressive than what people think. But the Yankees are not going to make it easy on them, and they absolutely want Cliff Lee. I would not be surprised if they throw 5 years, $115 million, 5 years, $125 million, that kind of offer. And I know that there are people in the baseball operations, people with the Rangers telling the ownership group, look, we don't want another A-Rod situation where we have too much invested in one player, where we don't have that type of payroll. You've seen this before. I've seen this before. You get a new ownership group that might be overenthusiastic and absolutely go crazy. And if they do that, I think the Yankees will draw the line, and then they'll set their sights on Crawford. And you're right. I did write, and I've talked to a couple of friends of Crawford, and they say do not underestimate this factor that he views the Yankees and the Red Sox as enemies after playing against them for so long. And it's just a question of will the offers be equal, from the Angels, the Red Sox, and the Yankees. If they are, then I think the Angels probably do have a leg up for the reason you're talking about.
I would love Crawford if he did that, because we see this in baseball a lot where guys basically put on the laundry and they take part in the rivalry, but not really. And then when it suits them, they'll switch sides. They'll go wherever the money goes. I think Johnny Damon was a great example of that. Everyone in Boston got really offended. How dare he? He should know how much we hate the Yankees. He doesn't care. He just wanted to follow the paycheck. Carl Crawford seems to me, he has that high school football background.
No doubt.
Super competitive. Seems like a guy who would actually follow through with that.
He is very, as players go old school. Now, I qualify that by saying, look, you know what? There's a good chance he's going to take the highest offer. If the Red Sox and the Yankees blow the other teams out of the water, he'll probably wind up signing there. But when Carl Crawford was with the Rays, there were situations in which he, didn't like the work ethic of Delman Young, for example, when Delman was early in his career, and he told him to his face. When Pat Burrell was mouthing off to a young player in the summer of 2009, he basically said, hey, back off. he had his locker moved away from another teammate in the summer of 2009 because he didn't like his work ethic. That's kind of his personality. But again, dollars to dollars. There's going to be pressure from the union to try to max out, and he's going to be the best position player in the market. He's going to get the biggest offer, so there will be pressure on him to take that, even if it comes from the Yankees or Red Sox.
And you could make the case the Red Sox and the Yankees don't totally need him, right?
I think you're right. Without a doubt, where the Yankees stand, because they are sitting there with three outfielders right now. The Red Sox, to me, in some respects, dollars aside, Adrian Beltre is probably a better fit for them. But I do think that there's a lot of pressure on the Red Sox this winter to get better in some form or fashion, especially given, how they view 2010 as being a disappointment. So I would not be surprised if the Red Sox extend themselves in a way that we have not seen them do in recent years in some of this bidding.
Well, as a Red Sox fan, I'm just going to tell you, that's the kind of thinking that got us into trouble before 2004. The whole point of Theo's regime was that he wasn't going to think like that, and he wasn't going to overreact to a season that didn't go the way they wanted it to, and he wasn't going to overreact to the fans and the media who said, we need a big guy, we need a big guy. That's what he didn't do. And the other thing is he never went after those guys in the, past age 30. He was on record as saying that's how teams get in trouble when they give these big contracts to these people who are on the tail end of their prime. So for me, going after Crawford and then, at the same time going after Jason Worth too, if that part's true, Jason Worth's 31. Doesn't that fit into what he said that he would never do?
I would agree with you, and that's why, some of the early speculation tying the Red Sox with Worth, I'm going to be curious to see exactly how far they go. I know that some teams view Jason Worth, while, a guy coming off a terrific season, he's got a lot of skills, there's a lot of concern about him because of his injury history, because of the fact that he seems to be prone to these slumps. We'll see, and I got to believe that a big part of the Red Sox internal conversation is along the lines of what's going to happen next fall when Adrian Gonzalez becomes a free agent. If he's going to be traded between now and the next trading deadline, there's no question, by the Padres. And if the Red Sox believe that he's going to be a free agent, then their situation's a little bit like the Yankees were with CC Sabathia in the summer of 2008. They knew that he was going to be their big target even after he got traded to the Milwaukee Brewers. Do you lay back and prepare yourself to go after him? Because in a lot of respects, he probably is a better fit for what they need than Crawford is.
Right. And, the other thing is the Ellsbury part of this for the Red Sox. Assuming they get one of these guys, that they're admitting that they're going to trade him, and that automatically reduces his value by like 40%. Why not just give this guy another year?
Well, and I think they will, because I think their situation with Ellsbury is actually a lot like the Rays had with B.J. Upton, where if you trade him now, you're going to get 40, 50 cents in the dollar because he's coming off a bad year, because there are questions. I mean, everybody else with other teams reads the quotes from Kevin Youkilis, talking about, boy, this guy should have been around more. So they're not going to get those type of offers now, and I do think that they probably I know for sure that in some corner of the baseball ops, their feeling is, look, we're not going to give this guy away. Let's give him another year. Let's start 2011 with him and then go from there.
If I was a National League team, I would go after him. I wouldn't be scared off by the Boris thing because, I think he'd be great in the National League, and I think maybe in a smaller market, getting away from Boston, he might take off. And worst case scenario, wouldn't he net the 2 first-round picks or the first round and the sandwich pick if somebody else signed him in a year from now?
Yep, and there's no question. The one thing is that I do think the Boris thing is becoming, the fact that Scott Boris represents these guys has become a major factor, and the Brewers have found out about that with Prince Fielder. When you say Prince Fielder, you think 40 to 50 homer type guy, 140 RBI, but teams that have talked to the Brewers have basically indicated to them, we're not going to give up anything good for him because we know he's going to walk away. And we've seen so many teams, whether it's the Rockies with Troy Tulowitzki, the Rays with Evan Longoria, they want to invest long-term in these guys, and the Boris clients just don't go down that path, and I think that really diminishes their trade value.
Am I wrong for thinking, though, it's kind of an advantage to take a flyer on that guy for a year and hope he likes your city, and if he doesn't, then you get the first-round picks anyway?
Prince Fielder?
Yeah. Anybody of that. Like, you roll the dice with that guy for a year. You hope you win him over. And worst case scenario, he leaves and you get picks for it. At least you took a chance.
I think with the Boris guys, it makes no difference. I really don't.
Really?
I think it makes no difference. And I hear you on the draft picks, but if for example, if you're the San Francisco Giants, for example, who could use a first baseman in a lot of respects, Prince Fielder would be perfect for them. The Brewers would tell them, look, you have to give up Madison Bumgarner. And there's no way. The Brewers' first thing they're looking for is high-end pitching. And for a Boris client, I'd never give up those type of prospects.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. What about Ryan Braun? Gammon's floated his name out, said he might be had.
Yeah, I think any of those guys. I mean, the Brewers' priority right now is to get any kind of high-end pitching because that's what they lack so much. And I'm sure that if you called Doug Melvin and offered, prospects, like a Casey Kelly, like a Steven Strasburg, like a Madison Bumgarner, you're going to get their attention. But boy, in the last 3 years, baseball teams have so much gotten to the point where they're just hoarding young talent, which is why young pitching talent, which is why teams like the Blue Jays, they become dangerous. Alex Anthopoulos, since he took over the Blue Jays, has just been collecting this young pitching, and I think he did it basically after watching what the Tampa Bay Rays did. They became relevant after they put together a young pitching staff.
Well, obviously Crawford's leaving Tampa, and it seems like they might lose Soriano too. Do they get picks for him? I mean, it seems like they're right back to where their wheelhouse basically.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they, the question for them is, I think, going to be, and they've got, ready-made fixes right away with Desmond Jennings taking over in their outfield for Carl Crawford, with Jeremy Hellickson taking over in their rotation next year. There's a presumption among other teams that if you want to get a Matt Garza, if you want to trade for James Shields, who had a really down year in 2010, you can make that trade. And the Rays always seem to, work to stay ahead of the curve. That's why they traded Scott Kazmir. They're going to be really active. And the one question for them is going to be, can they completely rebuild their bullpen? Because basically everybody in their pen, from Soriano to Grant Balfour, Randy Choate, they're all free agents. And they're going to Andrew Friedman's big challenge this offseason is going to be reconstructing that bullpen. And
yet the Giants showed that, obviously Brian Wilson doesn't count for this, but it's so easy to just luck into those setup guys.
Yep.
Like they had Ramon Ramirez and Javier Lopez, who
and I talked to people.
I watched. I watched those guys. How are those guys World Series guys?
See, that's the exact question. The Red Sox guys in their front office were asking the same questions. They're looking at each other going, wait a second. How is it that, Javier Lopez went from being a big question mark in our bullpen to being a shutdown guy where he's dominating Chase Utley and Ryan Howard, and he's a weapon against Josh Hamilton.
Unbelievable.
And that is the volatile nature of middle relief, and why, we saw the Cleveland Indians have a terrible bullpen in 2006, have a great bullpen in 2007, to the point that they're one game away from playing in the World Series, to go back to having a terrible bullpen in 2008. And that's why teams are so afraid to invest in these middle relievers, setup guys, because they just go up and down.
Jason Worth, we talked about him before. The last time you were on the podcast, we talked about the concept of the bridesmaid signing, where the guy who kind of piggybacks on the sure thing signing always ends up getting overpaid and doesn't usually end up making the difference that teams thought. You got to do a blog on this, I think. There has to be 20 examples of this over the last 20 years, right?
Especially with starting pitchers.
Yeah.
A team misses out. I think Carlos Silva wound up getting one of the great contract busts in the history of baseball when the Mariners, went after some other guys, and then there was Carlos Silva left on the board. And so they grabbed the bridesmaid, 4 years and $48 million. And I agree with you. I think that there's a possibility that someone is going to go way beyond what as we start the off season, as they sit down in their organizational meetings internally, they're probably saying, well, we'll only go to $80 million on Jason Worth. But then if they get frustrated in their pursuit of Carl Crawford, suddenly, maybe the Detroit Tigers will go to $120 million if they see their offseason falling apart.
Mm. So you don't think Cliff Lee's 32, you don't think there's any way he gets more than a 5-year contract?
from the Yankees. That's where the Rangers can separate themselves, between that and the difference in the state tax. If the Rangers stepped out and said, you know what, he's so important to us, we're willing to take a risk on a guy who's a really great athlete, maybe we offer him 6 years. I know going into this, he's aiming at the Sabathia contract, 7 years, 161, and the feeling among the teams that used to have him, Philadelphia, Seattle, other clubs, is that he's going to be looking for the highest dollar figure. And
so 6 years, 130?
Dangerous. I'm sorry?
6 years, 130?
I think it's going to be for more money than that. I think he's going to be, the way the Yankees will do it is, and this is what they'll do typically, Brian Cashman likes to come in and be the quick hitter. I think they're going to be willing to make Lee give him the highest salary of any pitcher in the history of baseball besides the Roger Clemens contracts, and go, $25 million or $26 million over 5. And, if Texas gives him a 6 year, maybe he winds up in that 140, 145 range.
God, it's funny how it's sports, politics, whatever. Teams just repeat mistakes from the past, right?
Over and over and over again. Cliff Lee's unbelievable, but
yeah, I agree.
I had one executive tell me that he sees the potential for a great thing for the Yankees or the Rangers for 1 or 2 years, and then it could turn into a Barry Zito type contract.
Good times. Dave, what do we make of the Giants winning the World Series going forward in terms of how to build a roster?
Well, they kind of, I think, almost are out of the mode. It sounds weird because they had this, among their position players, they had this weird collection of, cast-offs and guys who were picked up, the Pat Burrells. Edgar Renteria had 52 at-bats in August and September, and suddenly, he sees a fountain of youth in October. But really, let's face it, they won because they're pitching, and that's kind of what the Rays have been focused on. So I almost look at them as being right out of the Rays mold, where you just hoard young pitching and especially impact-type pitching. And that, going back to what we were talking about before, when teams talk trades now, it's all about trying to acquire those type of guys. And I think that, the Giants' success is reinforcing that with teams who are already thinking in that direction. Look at the trade we saw between Oakland and Kansas City, where the Athletics desperately need some kind of offense, but they give up Vin Mazzaro, who, he might turn out to be a middle-of-the-rotation type guy, but he's got a power arm, and so the Royals are looking at him saying, you know what, let's acquire that type of guy. That's why the Jays went and traded for Brandon Morrow last year. Those guys who can throw 95, 97 miles per hour are becoming the focal point of what teams do, and as I say, it gets reinforced when you see a Lincecum, a Kane, a Bumgarner dominate in the World Series the way they did. I
liked Vin Mazzaro. I like that trade. De Jesus is one of those guys, he's not really an all-star, serviceable. He'll give you the 500 at-bats, but I don't know if I would have traded Vin Mazzaro for him.
Oakland's got the kind of depth where they could at least consider that, and they do have other good young pitching. But I know from the beginning of October, they were all over De Jesus in a possible trade. I think they wanted to move because they were worried, if the Red Sox would make a move on it if they didn't get Crawford or Wirth.
And the other thing, we haven't brought it up, but I think 2010 was interesting because the pitching took such a leap just in general. And I think, you got to blame the PEDs, the post-PEDs, all that stuff. And, not only is Tampa, I think, a team that could follow the San Fran blueprint, but potentially KC, not that far away, Oakland, not that far away, Toronto, not that far away. Are we headed for this decade where there's just no way to predict what the hell's going to happen in October?
I hope so, because, I know that people, certainly in the Fox executives could have been thrilled that the Yankees or the Phillies weren't in the World Series. But I tell friends all the time, we've never seen pitching like we saw from the Giants in the World Series. Those guys were unbelievable.
Yeah.
And Kansas City does have this incredible wave of young talent. Every team you talk to, as they were preparing for trades in July, they went through the Royals farm system, and they were like, wow.
They're loaded with hitters, too. Yeah, hitters especially. They have some big-time hitters.
Right, Moustakis, Osmer's coming up, young first baseman. They are thinking, and I know internally the Royals really believe that in a few years they're going to be very relevant, and that's why they're willing to trade Zach Greinke now to get prospects who fit that time frame better. But they're loaded. As I mentioned, the Jays have done a great job of stacking up their pitching. So that's the direction. If 10 years ago everyone was trying to build a softball team with a bunch of guys who hit home runs and take walks, now it's all about getting power pitching.
And Greinke, I think that's really going to depend on the city for him because, and I know he does it. He had the panic stuff going on a few years ago, and has rallied back from that. But he rallied back from it in a small market, not getting a ton of attention. I don't know if that's somebody that should be in a market like New York or Boston. Do you agree?
Totally agree. And, that's the perception of some of his friends, that he can control this process. We don't know exactly who's on his list, the no-trade list yet, but, the presumption is that he will steer himself away from the Boston and New Yorks and would be more likely to steer himself toward a team like the Minnesota Twins. But keep this in the back of your mind as we go on in the offseason. A couple of years ago, they actually had extensive talks between the Royals and the Rangers about Elvis Andrus for Greinke. This is before Andrus had established himself in the big leagues. He's perfect for the Rangers as a potential fallback if they don't sign Cliff Lee. And, he could be a guy, could be in front of their rotation. He's pitched in the American League. The Rangers are loaded with prospects, so they certainly would have what the Royals would need to make a deal for Greinke. And I really think, whether it's Lee or whether it's Carl Crawford or whether it's Zach Greinke, that the Rangers are going to be probably as aggressive as the Yankees and the Red Sox are this winter.
If I was Greinke, I'm going to the National League. Trade me the other league where I get to go against pitchers.
Because you get to tick down your ERA about down a run and a half. All he has to do is ask Roy Halladay about that.
Yeah, I'm an only child. I think of my own stats. I know I'm going to bump like 0.6 off my ERA and 0.4 off my 0.23 off my WHIP, and I mean that's just perfect. Toronto, you mentioned them earlier. Not that far away.
You know what? If in the middle of next summer you and I were talking about the Jays leading that division, it would not be a surprise.
I agree. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, if the Yankees, they're getting older. Questions certainly the back end of the Red Sox rotation with Beckett and Lackey. Ricky Romero is a legitimate front of the rotation starter. Brandon Morrow made huge strides. I tell people this all the time, friends who are in fantasy leagues. I mean, Brandon Morrow at times last year was as dominant as any pitcher in the American League, and it seems like he's just headed in that direction. They have, this great group of young pitchers coming up, and the question is how quickly will they mature? And, will Vernon Wells repeat the type of year that he had? Will Jose Bautista repeat the type of year that he had? That to me is going to be the bigger question for them. It's not about, whether their pitching is going to continue to be great. It's going to be whether or not their position players can do what they did in 2010 and hit that many home runs.
Sandy Alderson getting a lot of buzz. You buying?
I am buying because you're talking about an organization that probably had less structure than any other team in baseball. In fact, the Mets under Jeff Wilpon in the last 5 years have reminded me a lot of, you and I when we were growing up and we're reading about the Yankees in the mid-'80s, where George, you didn't know if the most influential guy in the organization was George's driver or maybe his barber or maybe, his general manager of the day. That's kind of the way the Mets have felt in recent years. And Sandy's going to go in there and actually give them some structure, and bring in, people like J.P. Ricciardi and Paul DePodesta. I'm sure that the person they hire as manager is going to be a really smart guy. And I think that's great, but the Mets are a long way away from being relevant in terms of rebuilding what they have within that organization. But I don't think there's any question Sandy's the perfect guy for where they've been.
You know what I do? So here's my first move as Sandy Alderson. I call Rivera, $75 million, 3 years. Come over to us. I'm severely overpaying you.
To change the culture.
Yeah. I am glad you get to stay in New York. You just be, the stadium's a little bit of a different direction. Everything about your life will be the same. National League, a little bit easier. and we're going to really, really overpay you. You're going to we're offering you $30 million more than you're going to get from the Yankees.
And I can tell you the Yankees won't chase it to that. The Yankees would never chase it to that level. But I just having many conversations with Rivera over the years, I don't think he'll play for any other team. I think I joked with him in the spring as all these young players are coming over to him, talking with him. I said, "You're going to be like Yogi, right? You're going to be like 85 years old and hanging around the clubhouse and throwing out the first pitch on opening day." And he was laughing and basically saying, "Yeah, that's right." And so I don't think he'd ever leave, but they certainly would get his attention with that kind of offer.
You got to do something, I think, if you're the Mets. I mean, I don't think the Jeter move would make sense. You said the last time you didn't think Jeter would get more than $15 million a year. You sticking with that?
In that 3 years for 50 range, 3 for 15, 3 for 16. Maybe they just to give them a round number, you give them 50. But I think they feel pretty confident about their position, which is the Yankees I'm talking about, where they feel like, look, we're going to pay him far more than anybody else would because we're the Yankees and we really value him. But we're not going to go nutty. And I think that if Derek tells them that he finds their offer to be unacceptable, they're going to basically tell him, go ahead and shop it then. Go find another team that's going to pay you as a 36-year-old shortstop coming off a career-low batting average, career-low on base percentage with what's perceived to be diminishing range. Go ahead and go better our offer. And if you can, good luck to you. But we don't think anybody will.
And then he'll say, but I'm a 2010 Gold Glove winner.
Which, of course, as we know, doesn't. As Rafael Palmeiro can testify from the year he played, 24 games at first base?
Yeah.
And he won a Gold Glove award. I've been in. I used to be. The Sporting News used to oversee that award, and what they used to do is send you these forms, and you take them into the coaches to fill out. And I swear to you, this is how the process went. I would go into the coaches' room, and I would hand the Gold Glove form to each of the coaches, and one of them would say, "Hey, who's a good shortstop in the American League?" And somebody would chime in, "Oh, Jeter's really good." And they go, yeah, Jeter. And they would all write in. You'd have like block votes from a lot of the clubhouses because the coaches, that's sort of how haphazard it was done.
Most bummed out guy post-World Series, I'm throwing a name out there. Tell me if you agree. Jed Hoyer. I mean,
no doubt.
There is no reason that the 2010 Giants could not have been the 2010 Padres. It really came down to like that 1 week when everything fell apart. But similar teams. I mean, the Giants had better starting pitching, obviously. But I think they were in the vicinity of each other. He's got to just be like lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling.
Well, and the Padres dominated the Giants during the regular season. They beat them head to head, and. The Giants won in the World Series in the postseason with a style of play that the Padres had, that they would eke out a few runs, scrape it together. They would pitch great. And, for all I got a lot of emails because I had the Giants get knocked out in the second round. I got a lot of emails from Giants fans saying, you didn't believe in us. And I'm just kind of cracking up saying, it basically took a Padres 10-game losing streak to play the Giants back into the situation.
Yeah.
And what's sad, and having worked in the San Diego market, I can promise you this, that as great a season as the Padres had, and they played so well for most of the year, it will give them no bump in attendance out there.
Right.
It will have no bearing. And the other thing, too, is we all know they're within, the next year of losing the best player on their team, which is really kind of sad. I totally agree with you that it had to have been very tough for Jed after they lose.
Well, and also it was a year where, because of the McCourt situation, the Dodgers spent, $30-40 million less than they normally would have.
Yep.
And it was just this wide open year that I don't know if that's going to happen year after year for the Padres to be able to compete in that division with teams that are spending $70 million more than them. Probably won't happen again.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely possible that the Padres of 2010 will be like the Mariners of 2009, where everyone coming off the year in which they played well say, okay, if the fan base might expect them to, come in next year and have a great year. Their lineup remains unbelievably thin in the way that the Mariners lineup was coming into this year. And if they came back next year and won 65 to 70 games, that would not be a surprise.
In your opinion, the Giants, listen, we play the baseball playoffs. The whole goal is that anybody can win. And I do think the Giants were the best team. They played the best. They came through in the most moments, and that's baseball. That's why we play the actual games instead of simulating on a computer. With that said, the worst World Series champ since the 0-2 Angels?
No, the Cardinals in 2006. I mean, they were so bad down the stretch. I had a scout say to me that as those playoffs began, they said that team will not win a game in the postseason. And, the last couple of weeks, they were awful. And then they found themselves. And the Giants, and I think you could make a case, too, and I grew up a huge Dodgers fan, that 88 Dodgers team, which had a lineup of, and I was talking about this with Oral Hershight during the postseason, at first base, Franklin Stubbs, Steve Sachs. Their number 3 hitter in that World Series was Mickey Hatcher. Left side, Dave Anderson, Jeff Hamilton, John Shelby. Rick Dempsey was the catcher for the final game of the World Series because Mike Soch had gotten hurt. That was a team that if you ran that same group out during the regular season next year, the Dodgers probably would have won 45 games.
That's a whole separate argument, and that's one that when you throw at Dodger fans, they get upset, but they know it's true. Because that's the worst World Series champion ever. And it really came down to the Gibson homer. For whatever reason, that completely changed everything about that series and sent Oakland into like a legitimate tailspin. But you're right. I used to play What If Sports a lot, the simulated baseball, and you come up, and sometimes they'd have these leagues where you would just grab a World Series champion. And the 88 Dodgers would always go like 50 and 112 because statistically it was a disaster. It was Hershiser and nobody else. God.
I was going to say, and I totally agree. And I was at that point, as psychotic a Dodger fan as there could possibly have been in that whole postseason, I was just laughing. Like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
I think the stat is that the World Series, Tommy Lasorda put on 11 hit and runs, and they got hits on 10 of them. Okay? I mean, it was ridiculous how, you're looking at the players, and Mickey Hatcher turned into Babe Ruth in that World Series.
Right. It was the Bishop from Caddyshack having the round of his life, but for the entire playoffs. One thing that was interesting to me about this World Series, because the Giants, and a big deal was made out of this, the Giants, 56 years of torture. They'd never won in San Francisco. They got off the hook. The Phillies, who had not won in, I think, 28 years. They're off the hook. The White Sox, 9 decades, whatever. The Red Sox. There's really not a lot of fan bases left. It's basically the Indians and the White Sox, right? At this point?
The Cubs.
I'm sorry, the Indians and the Cubs, yeah. And that's it. Is there another fan base that you feel like is tortured? Like, I'm almost ready. We're at the 25-year mark. We might be able to move the Mets back into that group.
The Mets could be in that group. I'm sure, you'd have Mariners fans would start to say, hey, you should be part of that.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I would definitely say the Cubs are sort of in a special class by themselves at this point.
And then Indians a close second.
I think, we've gotten to the point now where the Cubs have become, sort of the Red Sox, the Vikings, the Buffalo Bills all sort of rolled into one at this point. Where I have people come up to me who say, hey, I'm a Cubs fan, and they say it like, that they almost sort of apologetically, sort of like I'm a loser for life type of tone. And quite frankly, and you can appreciate this. Growing up in Vermont, it was sort of like the way that all my friends were saying, I'm a Red Sox fan.
Yeah, actually, it was the Patriots were even more like that. Like, you were embarrassed to admit you're a Patriot fan. I think the Cubs fans are at that point. And the only reason I throw the Indians in there is because Cleveland hasn't won anything in '64. So I think all of those teams have now collectively assumed that identity. But then, another team I think that is starting to maybe move toward there is the Dodgers. Even though it's only been 22 years, you just had the Giants win. They hate the Giants. It's now been, nobody under 30 who's a Dodger fan really remembers the Gibson homer. And now this McCourt thing, I think the Dodgers and the Mets are starting to assume that tortured identity maybe a little bit. I mean, there's still a lot of ways to go and more losing and all that stuff. But
well, and a part of that is that what hope is right on the horizon. If you're a Cleveland Indians fan, I can't. There's no franchise that's in a deeper place right now than they are because they have to. They're trying to rebuild some things. The economy in Cleveland is tough. They've taken down their payroll, and you're trying to figure out how they're going to bring it back up. The Dodgers, in the same way, it's the feeling of the McCourt situation has to get settled before they become relevant again. And even then, they've got some digging out to do.
Yeah. I think the 07 Indians collapse was underrated because now you look at what happened with Lee and Sabathia and how they've become such prominent figures. And then, they had Carmona, who was pitching pretty well. They had the bullpen that was in place. They had good young guys. Like, everything kind of built toward that season. They had a 3-1 lead, and they were home. And that one never gets – you talk about the great lost opportunities of the last decade or so. I think that's as high as any of them.
Well, and you wonder, if they win that World Series, if that can change some things for them, whether, they would be in a better position to, pursue other guys. Maybe they re-sign Cliff Lee. Maybe they do some other. Maybe they keep Victor Martinez for a couple more years. Maybe the fan base, gives them more of a pass. I mean, you saw what happened with Milwaukee, after 2008. They seemed to build off that. The Indians just didn't get much of a sustained bump off of that, and probably because, that fan base has reached the point of, we lost and now we're back down to the bottom, and there's not a real lasting belief in what's going on there, and that's what's so tough. I totally agree with you, and what's, really too bad is that was a great team.
Yeah.
That was and they weren't even getting any contributions out of Cliff Lee, but Carmona was throwing the ball as well as anybody, and CC is CC, and their bullpen was actually terrific that year. And now Grady Sizemore, we don't know what he's going to be going forward. Travis Hafner hasn't been the same in a while, and they're in a deep hole. There's no question.
Give us. I have a quick question from my dad. My dad is convinced that the Red Sox should trade Daisuke to Seattle. Even though he has a no-trade clause, he thinks he'll approve it because the Japanese players are so popular in Seattle and it'd be a change of scenery and good ballpark for him. Just for his sanity, could you at least tell me there's a chance?
I'm sure they'll look into it. I'm sure that they're, internally they've been frustrated with the fact they haven't been able to get as much as they expect out of him, but they also know because of the no-trade clause, because he's a Boris client, it gets very complicated. And at some point, and we've seen this time and again, where teams that have had, they trade away a starter because they feel like they are in a position to have excess, and they get stuck. And so they don't want to just give the guy away, and they know that Boris won't let him just give him away. He's probably going to demand something in return. Maybe he's going to want some extra money, to the point that Seattle's not going to give up anything for him. It's not any. If he didn't have that no-trade clause, I think it'd be very easy for them to deal him.
Let's talk about your book.
All right.
Your book is called How Lucky You Can Be, and it's about Dan Meyer. Why don't you tell the story?
It's basketball coach Don Meyer from Northern State University. On September 5th, 2008, he was 11 wins away from matching Bobby Knight for most wins ever for a coach who was at a 4-year institution, and he was leading his team out on a retreat, and he fell asleep at the wheel and hit a semi that was hauling 33 tons of corn head on. And they had to life flight him twice. His injuries were devastating. Every rib in his chest was broken. His spleen was irreparably damaged. His left leg was just crushed in the accident. And they life flighted him twice in the effort to keep him alive. And when the trauma surgeon opened him up in Sioux Falls at the hospital there, the first thing that he saw was carcinoid cancer, tumors throughout his small intestine and his liver. So the doctor knew that when he went out to update his wife, Carmen, on whether or not Don Meyer was going to live that night, he also was going to inform her that he had terminal cancer. And 6 weeks later, after he's released from the hospital, after a lot of his left leg was amputated, he returned to practice at 4:45 in the morning. And he's a remarkable person. He's touched so many lives. And, in the aftermath of the accident, he and his family have really come to view the accident as a gift because of, it certainly made him reassess his life and reassess some of the relationships he'd had within his own family, with other people, and he's made a lot of changes in his life since the accident.
And you stumbled across the coach at a very important time in your life, correct?
I did. When I got out of college at Vanderbilt, my first job was at the Nashville Banner, was covering City College basketball and in Nashville, and that's how I met Don Meyer. And at that time, he was coaching at David Lipscomb, and their big rival was Belmont. And I tell people all the time that, I was lucky enough to cover Cal Ripken when he broke Lou Gehrig's consecutive game record. I covered the Yankees for 4 years. They played the World Series every year. But the most fun I ever had as a reporter was covering this rivalry between these two schools that were 2 miles apart. They're both church-affiliated schools, and their games were just so intense. And there was so much interest in this rivalry that they actually moved one of the games to Vanderbilt, and they sold out 15,300 people in 1990.
Wow.
And, Coach Meyer, in his intensity, he was an old-school, Bobby Knight-type coach. He was someone that I kept in touch with after I left Nashville. And so when he got in this accident, I wrote a memo to people at ESPN and said, look, if he survives this, I want to go and work on the story because I know how many layers there are to it.
And, the book I thought was really good. And a book like this can go one of two directions. Either it goes the way you did or it can get super duper sappy and you feel like the author's, hitting your head over this. You're going to feel sad now. You're going to feel like your life is being changed on this page. How did you balance that, not going that direction?
Well, first off, I used, it was pretty clear, as I say, that his wife, his 3 kids, made it very clear that that how much they valued their communication with him after the accident because they felt like for years that they had been competing with basketball, that he was this classic 24/7 coach, that he had spent so much time focused on basketball that in the aftermath of the accident that they so valued their time with him in the hospital. In fact, the day he was released, his daughter Brooke got the call from his wife Carmen, hey, we're leaving the hospital after 6 weeks, and that Brooke hung up the phone and burst into tears because she felt like she wasn't ready to share her dad with a basketball team again the way that she had for so many years. And I in doing the reporting, I make all that very clear that they felt like there were things that they had missed. And when Coach Meyer had no oversight of the book, when I wrote it, he didn't read it as I was writing it, and I sent it to him in the beginning of September after it was done. And he called me and he said, "Well, it's an honest book." And he was basically talking about how a lot of the problems in the relationships had been before this.
Right. And he was happy with it, obviously.
I think he was taken aback by, some of the level of details about, some of the issues between them, going back between he and his son Jerry, or, situations that had come up with his daughters, or problems that he and Carmen had been having.
So, I can't even imagine reading a book about my life written by somebody else, because it seems like, he was a coach, but he wasn't Bobby Knight, he wasn't this guy who was in the mainstream his entire life with people picking him apart and writing opinion pieces about him and all that stuff. How do you think this will change what his legacy was?
Well, first, I think that, certainly in the aftermath of the accident, we did a documentary in 860 on him, and
yep.
He was, he won the Jimmy V Award and spoke at the ESPYs in 2009.
It was great.
Within the basketball community, he is so well known among coaches, because he's done all these coaching clinics, and, unlike a lot of these coaches who are super top secret, you're not allowed in my practice, for 38 years, he basically had been, if you were a middle school coach, if you were a college coach, if you were a high school coach, he's like, come on into my practice, and he handed them pamphlets, and he just, loved basketball so much and treasured it and drew on it that he always just wanted to share it. So within the basketball community, he was very well known. But outside of the basketball community, because he's coached NAIA Division II, he's not that well known. And we had an event for him on ESPNU the other night. The Don Meyer Classic was played, and a lot of players are coming up to me and thanking me, and really they should be, thanking people at ESPN, saying, it's so great that people get to know this person that has had such a profound influence on so many people, whether it's coaches or his former players, and that's a lot of what's within the page of the book. Well,
I thought it was really good, and it's one of those books that, we get trapped into our day-to-day lives, and you're just thinking about what's next, and the decision in the moment and all that. You never take a step back and think like, man, I'm lucky, I'm healthy, my family's healthy, stuff like that. And it was one of those books that kind of knocked me into that into that frame of mind of, you know, I'm pretty lucky. I haven't had anything bad happen to me. My family's healthy. And you just read something like that, it's inspiring. So I appreciate it. It was good.
Well, I appreciate it, Bill.
Hopefully we'll talk to you in about a month after the Red Sox make 15 fantastic moves and become the favorites to win the World Series. And best of luck with the book tour.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Where are you going? Do you have any signings to plug?
South Dakota.
Plug some signings.
Well, if you happen to be in Sioux Falls, South Dakota,
okay.
or Fargo, North Dakota next week, we're going to be there. We're also going to be doing stuff in New York and in the New York area in the next month, and in the Boston area, and down in Nashville as well in the weeks to come. We're just trying to figure out what Coach Meyer's schedule is, because he, still traveling, still doing a lot of speaking engagements, and we like doing the stuff together.
And you're going to promote all those signings in your blog, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. All right,
Yep.
Buster Olney, good luck with the book. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Bill.
Stay tuned for part 2 of the BS Report. Dave Damashek. We're going to talk Steelers, Pats, and a lot more.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Podcenter at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.
That concludes another episode of the BS Report, and we leave you with this final thought. Subway Restaurants is cheering on Jared. As if losing almost 250 pounds wasn't enough, Jared has run 552 miles training for the 2010 ING New York City Marathon. He fuels his training with the low-fat Subway Club. So now, to celebrate this landmark achievement, the Subway Club is the newest $5 footlong sub for a limited time, so hurry in. And hey, Jared, what's next? Scaling Everest? Maybe kayaking the